Hello, welcome to another SonicLAB. Today we're looking at the Arturia Beatstep. This was announced, I think it must have been at, was it NAMM or Mesa? I forget which. Anyway, it's another pad controller. So what, you might think? Well, actually, this one's a bit different. This is it here. It's a nice, solid piece of equipment. It's actually got a fairly decent heft to it. It feels like there's quite a lot of metal. I think that perhaps they made the metal this nice and thick, so it feels like it's got weight, and when you put it down and you bash it, it actually feels like it's going to take a bit of a pounding, quite easily. What you have is, if we go to the overhead, basically we've got 16 pads. They're all backlit. As it comes, some of them, they're set up as chromatic, the basic memories, but you can change the assignments here. You've got 16 pads, velocity sensitive and channel pressure sensitive only. Then you've got 16 rotary encoders here, which are fully assignable, plus an additional encoder, which you can also use, what this does is change certain things on the unit, like tempo, transpose, and what have you. There are two modes of operation. Control mode, which means that you can play this and assign the pads how you want and use it to control, whatever you like. And there's also sequence mode. Pressing sequence mode lights it up in blue, and then these are the individual steps on the sequence. Something that makes it quite different to other pads is the fact that there is a sequencer in this little 16-step sequencer. If we go back to the hardware, we can see that everything happens on this edge here. We've got gate output on mini jack, CV output on mini jack. I've currently got this going to my modular system. Then there's a MIDI out, which comes on this little tail here. So there's a mini jack to MIDI port. That's just MIDI out. Then we've also got USB power. I think this is micro USB, no, mini USB rather than micro. So it's the one that's probably not your mobile phone charger, probably one of your old school digital cameras, but it does come with the lead. So let's jump straight in and take a look at what happens in control mode. So here I am in control mode. I can press recall and recall patch 1. So these are just chromatic going up and setting. Now, basically to change all of this, we have to go to the editor. So if I bring the editor up here, I start in this patch. You can see down here, this is a MIDI note. I can change it to mini machine control, switch control, or patch change. I can have it gate or toggle. I can set the channel per pad as well, which is also handy, and then set the note value here. Say if I change it to switch control, it might just be a momentary controller value. Take that back to MIDI note. Now if I come back here and I recall, say, patch 5, now I've got my pads on octaves here. So really simple. So if we go back to the editor, let's just take a little look around, click on one of these controllers. It can be off, control, or NRPN, RPM, which is sort of higher resolution values. We can set the controller value. We can set a minimum and maximum value, so we could scale them between two. We can again set the different kinds of absolute and relative modes, so their pickup. We can also set the channel here. It's all very straightforward. Same thing goes for the sequencer. Again, this can be set up quite easily as well. The one thing that I did find a little bit missing was, I've always thought this with pads, and it's no different to any of them. For some reason, there's no ability to transpose the pads. So if you had, say, an octave worth of beats plus a few extra pads on this, there's no way to actually transpose the whole thing up and down by semitones or octaves or whatever, which is kind of a shame, because when you look at the actual control, in sequence mode, this will actually act as a transpose. So if I can hit, I can do it that way, that's no problem. But sadly, not when in control mode. It's impossible for me to just transpose. That's just a little thing that's kind of a bugbear of mine about pads in general. I'm pretty sure that a software revision would perhaps address this, so maybe a selection of key combinations you could scroll, because obviously when you're in creative mode playing pads, you don't really want to stop and assign it to drum sounds, it's aggravating. Whereas if you could just transpose the pads very quickly, then you could quickly audition whatever sounds are there, particularly say in Ableton, where things are set up in blocks. you know, anyway, I'm just saying. So in sequencer mode, we get a little bit more flexibility in terms of how we can assign what value each of the pads have. So if I now come here, I switch to control sequence mode. This is actually all of the steps I've got. I'm going to go back to a different sequence where all of the steps are lit, because I could switch individual steps on and off. If I just recall this patch, and I can also set the length of the sequence differently. So I press the sequence, I press shift and channel. This is something I didn't find in the manual. I can now change the sequence on the fly. And there are a bunch of other things that you can do, but only in the editor. You can set the sequencer channel, you can set the overall transpose, you can set the scale type, let me see, the swing. That's something I'd like to see on the front panel. You can change the step size. So if I play a sequence here, I press the shift function, you see I'm in 16ths. I can change that to 30 seconds, this is the overall tempo, 8th, or quarter note, so I can change the double up the tempo time. The other thing I can do is affect the forward, reverse, alternate, and random, so the direction of the sequencer. The other thing that we've got the opportunity to do is set the scale for each of the sequencers. If we come here, I press shift, I can go chromatic, major, minor, Dorian, mixolydian, harmonic minor, blues, and user scale. And what that means is the resolution of each of these pots, because when I'm programming a sequence, if I come here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set the program length to just 8, so we're just going to work on the top row. Now I press play, I've got all of the notes triggered. I can switch on and off individual notes, and this is coming to when if I go, I can get rhythms going fairly quickly. Obviously I can set a swing value, but again that's only in the editor over here, so there's no way of going that. But basically if I switch them all on, basically we've got, and then I'm in chromatic mode, that means that each click on one of these knobs is just a semitone. Or what I can do is I shift, I go to major, so each click then becomes a note on the major scale. So it means programming slightly easier. And then when I'm running, if I come back here, I press shift, I can now transpose the entire sequence. One thing that's worth noting is while you're playing a sequence, the keyboard pads also trigger as well. At the values that they are set to in the controller setup, not the sequencer setup. So all fairly standard stuff. I mean, it's a little bit fiddly to transpose. It's very easy to overshoot, and obviously you can't absolutely hit a note you want. Probably the easiest way to do that would be to store separate sequences and recall them with the button, and then they come in at the next available step. So that might work best. Obviously there's no actual MIDI input unless it's from the computer to allow you to transpose. But you know, if you're hooking this up with just modular equipment, and because you could just power it over the USB, you don't have to have the computer hooked up. You can recall up to 16 sequences and run stuff that way, and that's actually pretty neat. Speaking of MIDI CV out, standard Eurorack fare, which is volt per octave, so it's going to play nice with all of that kind of stuff. It's not going to work in the same way if you've got, say, an MS-20 Mini. If we go to the editor here, you can also set the CV gate channel to be a separate to the global channel and to the note outputs, so you can drive up to 3 things, you know, all on different MIDI channels. Of course, you can also use the control voltage output, which is normally set to being, you know, notes, to modulate some other parameter in your modular while you trigger, if you've got a trigger to MIDI. As I have here, I've got a Dofa A193, which I've got the MIDI cable coming into it. It means that I can take perhaps the CV as I've got here, and I've brought that into the filter, so that's actually modulating the filter cutoff with the note value. Would have been nice, like we have, say, with the Electron stuff, to be able to switch between different voltage standards, so we could drive MS-20 Mini or whatever. But I guess, you know, at this price, we can't expect everything. And also, it is USB pad, so there's a limit to how much voltage this thing can push out. But let's not forget, we've also got this MIDI control, and each of the pots on here is capable of outputting on a different MIDI channel and different MIDI controller numbers or NRPN and RPN byte values. That means that we could hook this up and have it running as a MIDI controller to Ableton, interfacing with that. We've got these 16 patches that we can recall, which also hold sequences and whatever. The sequencer can, by the way, can also be set to internal and external sync. In fact, there is a dedicated button for external sync, so you can switch that in and out from the front panel. So you do have quite a lot of options available to you. I'm not sure it would work as perhaps the only thing to interface either with your DAW or a piece of modular kit, but it gives you a lot of options. As I said, there are a couple of things that are a little bit irritating. The fact that we can't transpose the pads, but that's a general pad thing. Perhaps that's not something I should put all of that onto this small unit here. That's something I'd like to see other manufacturers do. Also, if you're a real beat head, there's no beat repeat on this. So on some pads, you know, you can hit a beat division, switch it into repeat mode, and you get kind of rolls. You can't do that on this. But it's hard to be fussy at this kind of price. We're talking 89 UK pounds. Other currencies will display below. And for that, you're getting a 16 pad, 16 controller unit, plus you're getting MIDI to CV with a sequencer in. I mean, that alone is probably worth the asking price. So perhaps it's not going to be, you know, your only interface with either your modular or your digital world, but it could certainly fulfill many of your needs. And for this kind of price, it's hard to argue.